For the next few minutes, I want us to have a wee look at a well-known passage. It's from Mark chapter 6, verses 30. Oh, I'm Peter as well, sorry, for those who didn't know. And so we're going to look at Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through to the end of that section. And Julie's going to come and read this section to us. But before she does, I just want to point out something about this story. This miracle is in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it is actually the only miracle to appear in all four Gospels, apart from the resurrection. And so because they all include this story, it kind of hints that there is something really important in this story for us to learn from. And so in unpacking the story, as I'm going to try and do, I'm not just going to stick to the account that Julie reads. I'm going to jump around between I'm not literally going to jump around. I'm going to stand still, but I'm going to look at the different texts to try and create a full view of what happened. So Julie's going to read from Mark chapter 6.
Jesus feeds the 5,000. The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away, so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied.
Thank you. Let's just pray together. Father, it's your word, and we believe that it's got power to transform our lives. And we pray that through the reading of your word, and our hearts would be opened, our eyes would be opened, we would see more of you. I pray in these next few minutes they would not take away anything from your word, they would not spoil it, but you would use these next few minutes to help us see you better. I would ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I was wondering if you'd ever go on a reality TV show. Maybe would you enter the Big Brother house, or would you enter the jungle? I definitely would not. But I do know there's one TV show I would like to take part in. Man v. Food. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And this TV show is an ode to gluttony. The premise is simple. This man, Adam Richman, he would travel to various locations across the US, and he'd tuck into the unhealthiest, the fattest, most outlandishly huge local delicacy he could find. And the show always finished with Adam taking part in some extreme eating challenge, like eating 20 dozen oysters in one go, or that huge burger. I think it's an amazing show. It's amazing to watch. Livy and I do like it. So, now, I don't know if Jesus would have liked this show, but I do think Jesus liked his food. You know, the disciples of John the Baptist, they noticed this enough to ask Jesus why he didn't fast. Jesus' enemies noticed that Jesus liked his food enough to ask, why did Jesus keep on eating with the tax collectors and sinners? They called him a glutton. They called him a drunk. And Jesus' parables often included kind of imageries to food, to fruit trees, to banquets, to vineyards or vineyards. One scholar has written, if Jesus had not traveled by foot so far and often, it is quite possible that he would have been a little chunkier than he appears in most stained glass windows. Well, I'm not sure about that, but it certainly got me thinking about this meal that Jesus had here, to the feeding of the 5,000. And I want us to start kind of looking at it by thinking about the setting of this meal. Prior to this meal, the disciples had been out on a mission trip to Galilee. So there's kind of the map, and that's kind of the area of Galilee. And the disciples had been doing some mission stuff, and they were tired and possibly a bit despondent because they'd heard that John the Baptist had been beheaded. And so what they really needed was some downtime. And the text says that they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida, which the little arrow points to, the northeast of the Sea of Galilee. So they're traveling, and they've traveled across the Sea of Galilee to this town, a town which is in the middle of nowhere. But there's something unique and special about this town, something about this area of Israel, for it had a reputation as being zealot territory. Now, you might be thinking, what on earth is a zealot? Well, here's some zealots here. Zealots are, these are rugby zealots, rugby fans. They're very partisan, very fervent, zealous. And all of these zealots think this is the year they might win the World Cup. Well, maybe not the Scottish ones, but every other rugby fan there thinks, I think Scotland are already on their way home, possibly. So we're not talking about rugby zealots, but let me try and explain what I mean when we're talking about zealots, because we're talking about Jewish zealots. So let me tell you a wee story to help you. So we go back to the map. So not far from Bethsaida was a city called Gamla. And there was a guy from Gamla called Judah. You won't find him in your Bible, but he's a historical figure from around this time. And here's an image of what this town, this city called Gamla, looks like today. We've got the ruins, I think there's a picture, the ruins down there, and then you've got the hill, and if you see the humps on the hill, that's where Gamla gets its name, because Gamla means camel, because of the humps. So there's this guy, Judah from Gamla, or Judah from Galilee, and he's a revolutionary. His dad was a revolutionary, he's a revolutionary, and his sons were revolutionary. And he started this political revolutionary terrorist movement in the city of Gamla called the Zealots. And these Zealots, they hated Rome. I mean, all Jews hated Rome, but these Zealots really hated Rome. They hated the taxes, they hated the census, they hated the Roman soldiers, they hated the Roman fortress that overlooked the temple of their god. They wanted the Romans out, and their strategy to get them out was violence. And they believed that God said they could use violence to achieve this goal. And these zealots were planning a revolt against Rome. And the Great Revolt eventually took place a couple of decades after this meal, which led to the zealots actually defeating the Romans. However, their success and independence only lasted until this guy, General Vespasian, who would later become emperor, showed up. And he showed up with his Roman legions, and he went straight to Gamla, the heartbed of zealot activity, and laid siege to that city. And we have this image. You can go and you see this image of the wall, and where the arrow is, it's where they believe that the line was broken and the Romans entered the city. They broke through that area, they believe, with their catapult-like equipment. And the catapults, they launched these rocks. And here's a picture of some of the rocks they found in Gamla. And these rocks, these catapult balls, are called nuclei, which is quite interesting as well. And so they use these giant rocks and they break through the wall. So, long story short, you bet you're saying, I wish it was shorter. So Vespasian and the Romans destroyed Gamla. Then they went on and destroyed Jerusalem, where they destroyed the temple. And in some ways, you could say Israel never really recovered from this. And this whole rebellion by the Zealots, had terrible, far-reaching consequences for Israel. It left the country in ruins. Now, why do I tell you this? I'm not quite sure. You might be saying, my wife is giving it, you shouldn't have done this bit. Okay. Well, because when Jesus arrives to where he is, there would have been lots and lots of zealots in the crowd. And if they weren't zealots, it would have been people who were really sympathetic to the zealots. Now, you might be going, yeah, Pete, this is all a little bit far-fetched. Not quite sure, really, Pete, about the connection. Well, check this out from the same story, but in the Gospel of John. This is how John closes this account of the feeding of the 5,000. John says, Jesus, knowing that they, and he's talking about the crowd, that they intended to make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. You see, when Jesus is there, the crowd, they wanted Jesus to become king. They wanted Jesus to become their military leader. And they had pre-decided the sort of Messiah king that Jesus was to be. They're not actually that interested in the message Jesus has. They're only interested in who Jesus could be for them. They've pre-decided what sort of role Jesus could play in their lives. And that's something we all do, isn't it? We pre-decide based on what's going on in our lives, on how we feel, on what we're thinking. We pre-decide who Jesus is. We pre-decide what kind of role he will play in our lives. You know, some of us, we look at certain teachings of Jesus and we go, oh, that's a bit outdated and that doesn't apply to me. Because if it did, we'd have to change our lives. So we pre-decide the impact Jesus can have in our lives. And some of us, we pre-decide how Jesus works in our lives. And we say things like, oh, if I obey Jesus, he will provide certain things for me. If I obey Jesus, he will provide the job for me, or provide the relationship, or provide the cure, or provide the house. Whatever it is, we pre-decide. And then when he doesn't provide these things, our faith begins to crumble because it's based on this pre-decision that we made about Jesus that's not accurate. And also some of us pre-decide that the thing we did in our past, the mistake that we made, disqualifies us. We pre-decide that God can't use us. We pre-decide who Jesus is and how big or how small his grace is towards us. And that's exactly what the Zealots were doing. They pre-decided who Jesus was and what kind of role he could play in their lives. And I know I fall into that trap myself. You know, the Zealots, they were following Jesus. They were following him to get where they were going. And maybe you can relate to that. There's an area in your life where you've gotten off track. And you're expecting Jesus to tag along and follow you. Where your expectations of Jesus have begun to override the reality of who Jesus is. And that's the kind of setting for this meal that takes place. Of course, if we're having a nice meal, there should be possibly people there. I mean, surely people make or break a nice meal. So let's have a quick look at the crowds. You see, here's what happens. It says they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. I want you to imagine the scene. Jesus and his disciples, they hop into a boat and they're, rowing across the lake. And there's some people that want to be with Jesus so badly that they literally run round the lake and beat them there. Now we read, it says there, many who saw, and they recognized them. Now, How many are we talking about? Not 10 people, not 20, not 50. The text says 5,000 people. So if you include the men and women and children, it becomes to about 10 to 12,000 people. So imagine the scene. Jesus and the disciples, they've left the crowds behind to get some much-needed rest. And they're rowing up the shore, and they're like, what's that? What's going on over there on the beach? What's happening on the beach over there? No. It can't be. It's swarms. It's crowds of people. Not more people. Please, not more people. I can imagine Peter in the boat. Oh, no, not more people. Oh, please, no. Maybe that's just me projecting my stuff into the story. If I'd been in that boat, I would have been rowing backwards. I don't know what way is forward and backwards. No way, Jesus. Let's go the other way. A different beach. Come on, Jesus. But not Jesus. Instead of Jesus getting kind of frustrated and annoyed and angry and telling them to turn around and row the other way, we read that Jesus had compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. So when Jesus looks at this vast crowd, he has compassion on them because he sees a people without a leader. He sees a people who are lost, people who are just kind of wandering aimless, without any purpose, or with a wrong purpose. A people with nobody to lead them, nobody to protect them. They're vulnerable. People who are weak, people who are hurting, who are oppressed, who are wounded, who are in pain. And maybe those descriptions actually resonate with you this morning. Maybe that describes your last week. Lost, hurting, wounded, in pain. Maybe that's the last couple of weeks. Maybe you're sitting there going, oh, it's the last couple of years. It's the last couple of decades. And so when we talk about what it's like to be a sheep without a shepherd, you're going, yeah, I get that. I'm just kind of wandering around, and there's nobody looking out for me, nobody looking after me. And Jesus sees this lost group, and he sees the people who are misguided and following the wrong thing. And yes, they're interrupting his plans. But it says Jesus had compassion with the crowd. And Luke, in his account, says that he welcomed them. And you know what I see happening here? I see that Jesus, he steps into the role of shepherd for them. He sees them as sheep without the shepherd. And he steps in and says, I will do that for you. I will guide you. I will lead you into truth. I will care for you. I will protect you. I will provide healing for you. It wasn't just the crowd who were there. The disciples were also present at this meal. The text says, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. You know, when I first heard that, I was thinking, yeah, that's my kind of disciples. Get out of here. It's like a small group. It's 9:45. Get your coats. You're leaving. Okay, it's done. But I don't think they're being rude here. I think they're actually being quite nice and kind for a change. I think they're saying, well, we're in the middle of nowhere. They don't have much food. It's getting late, so they must be hungry. So why don't we just kind of break up the meeting and let them go and get some food? But Jesus doesn't see it like that. Jesus responds to the disciples and says, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. And I just think, oh, Jesus is just so annoyingly relaxed about it all here. He's like, no, guys, we're good. They don't need to go anywhere. You handle it. You've got it. You can feed them. And maybe Jesus hasn't really looked around and seen that there's 10 to 12,000 people, I don't know. And the disciples, okay, Jesus must know what he's doing. Okay, so let's go and check the food supply. Nobody's got anything. And then they find out all they've got is 5 loaves and 2 fish and 10 to 12,000 people. Jesus, we have a problem. This isn't going to work. And Jesus is still chilled and relaxed. Yeah, don't need to send them away. Guys, you do it. You've got enough. You feed them. And the disciples, no. I mean, we can't do that. We don't have enough. We can't do this. What I've got is not enough. What I've got is not enough. And there's something so important here. Because Jesus wants to do something in and through the disciples that they don't have the resources for. They don't have the physical resources for the bread and the fish. They don't have the resources to do within themselves to do what Jesus desires. I remember a good few years ago, I was doing a meditation on this passage. I remember taking time and trying to put myself in the scene, trying to imagine what it was like to be on the hillside with Jesus, to feel the breeze, to smell the sea air, to smell the fish, to smell all the smelly people that were there, and imagine sitting there listening to Jesus teach. And I remember imagining I was just a little boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. And I remember somehow bringing them to Jesus. And I clearly remember I wasn't a cheerful giver. I was really reluctant. I didn't want to give my food away to Jesus. I mean, Livy, what child does want to give their food up? None of them do. Okay? No child ever wants to give up their food to anyone else. And I remember looking at Jesus and thinking, I don't have enough to give you. I don't want you to have it, Jesus, because I don't have enough. I don't have enough, and you're asking for too much. It's too much, Jesus. I don't have enough. It's too much. It's too much. And I was looking down at the bread and at the fish, saying, it's just not enough. I was looking down, it's not enough. It's not enough. You're asking too much. And I remember looking up, taking my eyes off the problem, taking my eyes off my lack, and looking at Jesus. And I looked at Jesus, and his eyes were full of compassion. And he said, bring them here to me. It's there in the passage. Bring them here to me. And I remember him kind of leaning in and saying, because it will be okay. It will be okay. What you've got is more than enough. And I believe the same is true for us as modern day followers of Jesus. That Jesus desires to do something in and through you and me. Something that we don't have the resources for. Because we look at what's in our hand and we say, Lord, it's too much. But Jesus is saying, bring it here to me. Because I'm more than enough. I'm more than enough. And that takes us on to our kind of final point. We've got the setting for the meal, we've got the people, but now on to the food. Now, I don't know what typical food you would have with your family at a meal if they were having a dinner party. Maybe it's burgers, maybe it's chicken, maybe it's there has to be curry, there has to be dal, there has to be dal. You know, I love dal. I love dal. Now, the main ingredient in this meal, as you already know, is bread. So now you're going, okay, Pete, we know it's bread, so can we all go? The rugby's about to kick off in 4 minutes. Can we all go home? No, we can't. Because I think there's something really important in us thinking about the bread. Because there's something really powerful in the symbolism about the bread in this story. And we get a clue about how powerful this could be in this random little detail that John puts into the story. For near the beginning of the telling of the story, he says, the Jewish Passover festival was near. And you might go, okay, great, another nice random thing that John throws in. But no, it's not random at all. John is trying to emphasize something here. And he puts this in for a very specific reason, not just because the Passover festival is near. For he wants us to connect this event where Jesus multiplies the bread, he wants us to connect this with the Jewish festival of Passover. And one of the things about Passover is to remember how God provided bread, provided this thing called manna for them, for the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. And here, Jesus is providing bread for the people. Now, imagine the Zealots. They're getting so pumped and excited. Passover is near. It's a time when God, through Moses, released the people from slavery. And they were released and bread was multiplied. And the Zealots are going, the Passover, bread multiplied, Jesus, bread. Oh, it's happening. It's happening. We're going to be set free, and Jesus is going to be our warrior king, and we're going to be free from Rome at last. But Jesus didn't come to set them free from Rome like that. But he came to bring freedom from something else. And to get the answer to that question, we have to kind of go back in the boat with the disciples. The meal is finished. We go back in the boat. They cross the lake again. And once again, this crowd of zealots, they run back round the lake and they arrive where Jesus was going. And they meet them there and they want the conversation to keep going because they're still thinking, he's going to be our king. He's going to be our king. And they want to find out more about the bread, about the manna. They're making all these connections. Jesus is like Moses. He's going to do this for us. And Jesus responds to them. He says, your ancestors, and he's speaking about the Exodus, he says, your ancestors ate the manna, the bread in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. Now, what bread, you might say? The bread that he just produced? You know that kind of stuff on the shore, the miracle bread? No. Jesus says, I am the living bread. He says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven, and whoever eats this bread, it's like whoever participates in what I am doing, will live forever. They won't die like their ancestors in the wilderness. And he says, this bread is my flesh. It's my body which I give for the life of the world. You see, this miracle event in the wilderness where Jesus provides this bread, it doesn't just mirror what went on in the Exodus. It foreshadows what Jesus is going to do on the cross, where he gives his life away. He's like, I am the bread. If you eat this bread, you'll never die. Jesus, he didn't come to bring freedom from Rome. He came to bring freedom from death, freedom from sin, freedom from, oh God, I can't do it. It's too much. Freedom from, oh God, I just don't have enough. And John is saying, look, Jesus isn't like Moses. Jesus is so much bigger than that. Jesus is so much bigger than that pre-decided Jesus that you want. Jesus is so much bigger than that pre-decided Jesus that you think you need, that you think you want. Jesus is so much bigger than that. And so when we are saying, oh, it's too much, I don't have enough. It's too much. I'm not enough. Jesus is, yep, that's true. But give me what you have, for I am enough. You know, during the time of the Exodus, the Israelites were commanded to collect only enough manna, enough bread for that day. Because God was just to be enough for that day. And the very next day, more bread would come. More manna would come. And they could collect that for the day. And the next day, more would come. And the next day, more would come. But some of the Israelites decided to keep some of the heavenly bread, the manna, to store it up until the next day. They paid no attention to Moses' instructions. Picture Seth and Judy. They're collecting their manna. And they're worried about tomorrow. So Seth says to Judy, I know Moses said there will be more tomorrow, but just in case there's not enough, and they take extra. But faith is trusting that there will be enough for today. And then tomorrow, trusting God for tomorrow. But those who ignored this instruction, those who didn't trust God, it says that the next day, when they got this manna they'd collected and stored up, it says there were maggots in the manna. But Jesus was saying, or God was saying through Moses, collect enough for today. There's that great hymn, strength for today, bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. So when I wake up tomorrow, there will be manna. When I wake up on Tuesday, there will be manna. When I wake up on Wednesday in my weakness, there will be manna, and he will make me strong. When I wake up on Thursday, he will see me through. When I wake up on Friday, he's fighting for me. Yes, I'm not enough, but praise Jesus. He is enough. He is the bread of life. But you know, when I'm really tired and when I'm really hungry, I don't go for the healthy option. I go for that large 200-gram bar of dairy milk, 56% of which is sugar. I look for that quick energy fix, that substitute. And in our walk with God, when we've stopped collecting our daily manna, we become hungry, we become thirsty, and we become susceptible to substitutes. And this morning, maybe you feel like the Zealots. You've tried to make Jesus a pawn in your own movement. You've pre-decided the role that Jesus can have in your movement, in your life. You don't really follow Jesus to where he is going. No, you follow Jesus to get to where you're going. Instead of being captivated by Jesus, you're trying to capture him and make him do what you want. Or maybe you have replaced Jesus, the bread of life, with some other substitute. But if you're to stop and take time, you would see that this substitute is not giving you life. If you stop and look at the stuff you think you've been collecting to keep you going, actually, there's maggots in your manna. And that thing, it doesn't have what you need. He is the bread of life. And just as I finish, maybe the communion team could come forward. There's an interesting connection I want to show you. We're going to go back to Zealot territory. Jesus has the bread. He's got the bread, and look at the words he uses. It says, he taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. And that mirrors communion. Right there in this story of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is mirroring or foreshadowing what is going to happen. Where the very last meal that Jesus had with his disciples before he went to the cross, he says he took the bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. And as you eat this, remember me. I am the bread of life." He's saying, I am the living bread. Whoever eats this will never die. And he tells his disciples, whenever you do this, remember me. Remember the sacrifice I'm making. And then when the supper was over, he took the cup. He gave thanks, and he gave it to his disciples, saying, share this cup among you. This is my blood, which is shed, which will be poured out for you. Poured out for your freedom, for your liberation. Eat this, drink this, and remember me. And so as we come to take the bread and the cup, take time to remember what Jesus has done for you. Take time to remember that not only did he die on the cross to save your sin, but he died to give you life now. He died so we no longer have to say, it's too much, I don't have enough, but we can say, God, you are enough. And so whether you love the Lord a lot or you just love him a little, he invites you to come and take of the bread, take of the cup. He says, come, the table is ready. All are welcome. The feast is spread. And as you come, may this meal nourish you. May it feed your soul. May it strengthen you. May it renew you. May you know it keeping you in the center of his gracious love and mercy.